All right, thanks, John. Yeah, let's see if we can go over to my little presentation thing. Let's see. There we go. Are you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with Earth's atmosphere, and this is just a view from the space station. One of the things I just wanted to show, I'm going to run through just a brief overview of why we're doing this, the work at OPALCO, and in my personal life, I'll talk a little bit what I call living the electric life. But one thing I wanted to show is the Earth. Are you able to see this video moving?
Yes.
Good. Well, the thing I want you to pay attention to is how thin the atmosphere is. And, if that were, just to give you an example of how amazing it is that we're able to live in this situation, that atmosphere, if that were a beach ball that you held in front of you, the thickness of that atmosphere is about the thickness of your thumbnail. So it's just, to me, phenomenal that this precious little veil around the Earth, keeps us going and gives us life. And, the thing to know about the atmosphere is we've been living in this world where we've been in, let's see, I'm going to change my view a little bit there. We've been, for a long time, mostly, for literally hundreds of thousands of years, burning wood and biomass. And then, a couple hundred years ago, we discovered fossil fuels, coal and oil primarily, and started burning those like crazy. And in the sort of the big scheme of things, it's a blip. The fossil fuel era is a blip, and we're very rapidly wanting to and trying to transition to clean renewables. The problem is that right now in this fossil fuel blip, we're emitting a lot of CO2 and methane, which have half-lives, CO2 of over 175 years and methane 11 years, which sounds like a smaller number, but it's very intense. Methane has very intense impact on the atmosphere, as does CO2. So, we should all know this. The thing that I really encourage us to understand is that, that 175-year half-life, that's 7 generations. And I think there's a little bit of poetry that's similar to the, sort of the Native American wisdom that's been around a long time, that traditional cultures try to think 7 generations ahead on the impact of policies and things like that they absorb. And here, this is just showing that the temperature, the atmospheric temperature is really spiking. This puts it in perspective over, thousands of years. And where this spike really is right here is really associated with just the past 50 years or so, as the industrial age really kicked into gear. And the National Academy of Sciences basically says if we continue on this path, about a third of all plant and animal species will be extinct in the next 50 years, which is unacceptable. Most of the heat is going into the oceans, and I mention that because we live in an ocean up here in the Northwest, the Salish Sea, and just to put it in perspective, global warming has heated the oceans by the equivalent of 1 atomic bomb explosion per second for the past 150 years. Just let that sink in. It's an amazing thing that the Earth is able to take that, but it's putting us in peril. And as I said, and as John mentioned, we live right here in the Northwest in the center of the Salish Sea. We've got super clean waters and air and moderate temperatures where, the Salish Sea keeps us from getting too warm in the summer and too cold in the winter. But things are really changing fast, and especially because the oceans have absorbed so much of that energy. And the two big things that we pay attention to here are ocean acidification, which is affecting a lot of our shell, anything that uses calcium, and of course CO2 emissions. The image on the right, the video on the right, is just showing wintertime. And you can see in the northern hemisphere, as the world starts heating up, or sorry, as businesses and homes start heating up, a lot of coal is burnt to generate electricity to keep us warm in the winter. And you'll also see some fires in Brazil. You see the red stuff, that's intense CO2 emissions in Brazil, burning the forest there, and also some fires that are going on in Africa. And all of this stuff that we're doing is causing basically extreme weather, and we're hearing about it all the time. The thing I'd like to just say personally is, here's what happened to us last year. This is, in the upper left, is a road that got washed out here on Orcas Island, and the upper right is just the next neighborhood down from us. Water rushing down a hill through this guy's yard and coming out under his fence. And then lower left is Bellingham, which is a town just to the east of us on the mainland. And nobody thinks about Bellingham flooding. And yet here it is, up to the windshields, cars on Bellingham, which, by the way, is not a shoreline or anything. This is just a lot of rain falling. And then our neighbors to the north, British Columbia, in the lower right, that's a highway I've driven on a number of times going up to BC that just washed out, a major highway. So it's insane. And there was some interesting research that was done. I know you guys have an academic background together, and I'll just mention that Lloyd's Insurance did some really fascinating research looking at micro rain data in London. Basically, the Greenwich Mean Time, the clocks and all that are kept at this amazing museum, has been tracking hourly water precipitation, for well over 100 years. And so that chart there that shows greater than 400 millimeters, a big spike, that's basically showing that since 1960, from 61 to 2005, the rainfall is increasing, but it's really increasing at extreme amounts, the greater than 40 millimeters per event. And so that's a 9-fold increase in extreme rain. And you're seeing, this was in 2005. So Lloyd's sort of was starting to tap into, and this is something a lot of insurance companies are doing, tap into, what's going to be happening to us. And for Lloyd's, it's what's going to be happening to insurance payouts due to the climate emergency. And the chart over on the left just shows that weather-related disasters are spiking. The red is in the United States, and the yellow is the world. So, this has big impacts and makes it very difficult to continue life, business as usual. This is just some other places, a little wider: Chehalis, New Orleans, Germany, New York City. This was all last year. And one of the things, here we are in San Juan County, and I mentioned, that our summers are not too hot and our winters are not too cold, but we also track something called heating degree days and cooling degree days, HDD and CDD. And basically, heating degree days are an indication of how much heat it takes to stay comfortable in winter, and cooling degree days are how much cooling or air conditioning it takes to stay comfortable in the summer. And I'll tell you, most people in San Juan County have no air conditioning. And yet we're seeing increased load due to cooling, because some do, and a lot of people are converting to heat pumps, which I'll talk to in a minute. So we're seeing cooling degree days starting to creep up. But the really interesting thing is the winter heating degree days are trending down, and we're seeing less and less heat needed to stay comfortable in the winter. Yes, we do have cold spikes where it gets extremely cold. We had one of our coldest cold spikes on December 27th, and the electric load went through the roof. But on average, and that's what's really important here, the trend, not the anecdotal instances, the trend is warmer. And the trend is so fast now that we're projecting that by the end of the century, it'll be summer-like in the winter here in the San Juans, which is just really something. So, hopefully most of that. You've hopefully not experienced it too bad in your personal lives, but if we watch the news, we know things are getting really, really serious. And so what can we do about it? And one of the things I like to talk about, and this is something I created for a talk probably 15 years ago. I was in Norfolk, Virginia, which ships a lot of coal to China at that time. And you walk around Norfolk and it smelled like coal. And I was giving a talk at an eco conference there. And basically, I wanted to try to point out that most of the people in the room, and hopefully you, and certainly me and Orcas Power and Light and a lot of people that live here in San Juan County, we struggle with this. It's hard to hear this incessant news, and sometimes we despair. And there's other people that, they just can't take it and they're kind of complacent, or they don't want to believe it, or whatever. And, this is natural, but these are places of low possibility. And really what we're trying to do and be is innovative. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and it needs to be done fast. And so I like to refer to this notion of visionary innovators, where the sense of possibility is really high. We're not checked out. We're not we are despairing, but we want to do something, and we see that there's things that we can do that will possibly help. And innovators, the big thing is it's not just talking about cool ideas and important things we could do, but we've got to do it. And so, for example, the legislation that's going through Congress, the Senate and the House right now is an example of really trying to meet the moment. I'll just also tell you personally, probably in 2013, that's when I bought my first electric vehicle. I decided I wanted to start living the electric life. I consult for the electric industry, and I wanted to feel, is it easy or hard to stop using fossil fuels? And so this is one of my first, I bought a Nissan Leaf, and my wife and I bought a Nissan Leaf, and we pretty much replaced every gas consuming thing in our life. And so this is just an example of that. There's a lawnmower, a leaf blower and a leaf vac, a chainsaw, and a weed whacker. And that little green battery just to the left of the chainsaw and sort of by the weed whacker, that one battery works in all those devices. And so I have 3 of those, and I just have a couple charging while I'm using one. If I'm mowing the lawn, I can, when one runs out, I just pop another battery in. So we've been doing that for a long time, and I can't tell you how nice it is, and I'm never going back. This is super clean. They're quiet. They don't exude oily smoke. It's just a wonderful thing. And yet those things right there, those are just a drop in the bucket of what we really need to be doing. And so I want to talk to you about the number one and two thing, which is the number one thing is decarbonizing. And the 2 big things that decarbonize the planet the fastest are converting transportation away from fossil fuels and converting heating away from fossil fuels. Collectively, these 2 things can emit over 80% of the carbon that's going into the atmosphere in the United States and around the world. And if we can, and in general, the mantra is electrify everything. If we can electrify fossil fueled transportation and heating using clean electricity, and I'll talk about that in a minute, by 2050, we can reduce carbon 72% from 2015 levels. That's a phenomenal reduction, but it will take huge investments. I'll mention that in a moment. And this is just a picture of why that is true. 45% of Washington State, and this is typical around the country, 45% of Washington State and our county emissions come from transportation. 64% come from the fleet of diesel ferries, and 29% of our county emissions come from fossil fueled heating. People are very rapidly switching over to heat pumps, though, and electric vehicles. We have one of the fastest growth rates for heat pumps and electric vehicles in the country. And this is because our electric cooperative, which is a nonprofit, is trying to get people to switch it up. We call it switch it up, and basically switch over to clean energy. We have some of the cleanest energy in the country here in the Northwest, thanks to hydro. And anyway, the chart on the left shows you a fossil fuel home compared to an electric home here in the county. So, you know, we're a fossil fuel home typically would use propane or natural gas to heat their water, to heat their space, and they would have a gasoline car. And they're consuming about typically 120 million BTUs. It would be more if you lived in a colder climate and less if you lived in a warmer climate. An electric version of the heating and driving consumes a small fraction of that, basically 25%. And that's using a heat pump water heater, a heat pump heater, which has built-in air conditioning, and an electric vehicle. And it not only saves you energy, it saves you money. Electricity costs less than fossil fuels, and because cars and heat pumps are so efficient, you just need less electricity to do the same amount of work. So, you know, again, it's less than a quarter of the annual cost to heat and drive using electricity. And this is similar around the nation. And finally, the CO2 emissions are vastly lower. We're very fortunate here because we have very low carbon energy in Washington State. So the CO2 emissions are just a small fraction of a fossil fueled heating and driving. And so, you know, here's just a few examples. The upper left, that's a low income family here on Orcas that bought a used Leaf in 2015. So they bought a 2013 Nissan Leaf in 2015. A lot of times people think EVs are you know, for the rich and famous maybe, but more and more people, especially as EVs kind of move through the food chain and become used and available at lower cost, a lot of people are driving them these days. I also show you electric buses. I just talked to the head of transportation, public transportation on Martha's Vineyard, and they have 32 buses on Martha's Vineyard, 16 of which are electric now. And electrification of public transportation is a priority. In China, they've had an amazing conversion from diesel buses to electric. And frankly, Martha's Vineyard is using Chinese electric buses made by BYD for their electric transportation. Ford F-150 on the upper right, that can power your home for several days. The Canoe electric van, they just did a deal with Walmart to provide vans for delivery of products. And in the middle, that's my car. That's a VW ID4. And I took that picture in February on Route 66. My wife and I were road tripping around the West, just trying to see, again, living the electric life. Can we go for long distance travel, you know, around the country? And the answer is yes. We drove 4,500 miles. We went down the West Coast and then over to Santa Fe on Route 66, and then up to Denver and through Utah and Idaho and Oregon back to Orcas, all with that car. We charged 42 times, and we paid nothing for fuel for any fuel, and we didn't even pay for electricity because the VW ID4 and other cars, other EVs, comes with 3 years of free charging. And also we charged at some hotels that, you know, they want to attract people to their hotels, so they provide free chargers there. So, you know, we're trying to live the life, and in general, we're getting away with it. Just going back to OPALCO and San Juan County, OPALCO is developing ultra-fast charging at ferry terminals, marinas, airports, and public transport hubs. The e-ferries and stuff, typically they come into a ferry terminal for 15 minutes. So we have to charge them very fast. We have electric buses. We just got some grants for electric buses, and those buses can they're not only electric, but during outages, they can put power to the grid to support emergency services. The float plane on the right, that's an electric plane that's being tested in Seattle. We get a lot of people to come in and go in from the islands via electric. And we're trying to develop, as I mentioned, Martha's Vineyard, we're trying to develop some local electric public transportation using e-shuttles. And that boat you see in the upper left corner, that is a 50 horsepower electric motor that's being developed by a company, Pure Watercraft, in Seattle. So, that's the decarbonizing our transportation and heating. The other key is to make sure that when we're powering those electric vehicles and electric homes, that the energy is decarbonized. And yes, in the Northwest, we are, but most of the world is not. And, there's still a lot of coal being burned and other natural gas. So, the world is preparing to spend roughly $3.5 trillion per year through 2050 to get to net zero. Huge investment, but very important. And I'll just mention that this chart just shows the carbon intensity of various forms of energy. Up in the Northwest, you can see our hydro is very low carbon, lower than solar and wind and nuclear, which are all very low. And natural gas and propane is much higher, as is oil and coal. That should not be news to anybody. So everybody's basically trying to stop using the big stuff and get to the small stuff. Washington State is trying to reduce emissions, and the key to that, getting to net zero, you can see the business as usual shows a steady increase of energy demand through 2050, but the little chart on the right shows a 28% decrease, and that's mostly because they're doing everything they can to set policies to convert the fossil fuel part of our energy use, like gasoline, diesel, natural gas, and coal-powered electricity, to clean forms of electricity. So you're seeing the total energy going down 28%, but electricity demand is almost doubling. So that's a heavy lift. And that's where most of the trillions of dollars of investment around the world, that's basically what they're trying to do. What we're doing here in Washington State is shift. And just to let you know how big a deal that is, how long might it take to do this? Well, if you look at this, the current wind power in Washington took 25 years to develop that. And the Washington passed this really forward-thinking Clean Energy Transformation Act, CETA, and it basically mandates that all coal power must end by 2030. And so we need to replace that with something, and wind and solar are the two things. But just to give you a sense of what we have to do, we have to almost triple what we currently have, which took 25 years to develop. So just trying to give you a feel for the complexity of this transition. It's not easy. We keep kicking the can down the road. We need to stop doing that and just start innovating. Here in the county, when you put $3.5 trillion each year into transformations, it's going to cause some cost issues. And so, one of the things we're trying to do is everything we can do to keep it affordable. So, we want to keep electric rates as low as possible. But as you saw from the charts I showed you earlier, electric versions of heating and transportation are inherently efficient and currently save our members well over $2,000 a year compared to fossil fuel forms. I mentioned public transportation. For us, it's land and water. This is a great way to make it so you don't need to drive on a ferry to get to Orcas. You can walk on and then depend on clean public transportation to take you around. That's also very good for low income people who can't afford cars and auto insurance. And also in Martha's Vineyard, most of the people that use public transportation are young people who don't drive but want to get around the islands, and old people who, they're just not interested in having a car anymore. They don't feel safe doing it, so they use the public transportation. We, trying to do everything we can to continue to protect the environment. Even here, even though it's more moderate, thanks to the Salish Sea, we do have heightened fire risk and water shortages and that sort of thing. So we're trying to manage our forests really smartly and take potential fuel, the kind of thing you see burning fiercely in California and Oregon, and turn it into energy and biochar, and put that biochar back in the forest to improve soil health and also in the farms. Yeah, so that's it. I'm going to stop and just try to work with you here and answer your questions, and let's talk.
Wow.
Okay, I don't know what biochar is.
Biochar
Yeah.
is it's a really cool thing. Google on it. But basically, we're developing a facility that will take woody biomass and generate energy in a way that absorbs CO2. If you take a piece of wood and light it on fire, if you buy charcoal, that's wood that was lit on fire and then extinguished. And when you do that process, you actually absorb CO2. Now, if you burn that coal, or if you burn that charcoal, you are giving off CO2 at that point. But if you put it in the ground, if you grind it up and put it in the soil, soil loves carbon. It helps it absorb moisture and hold it, and so forth. So biochar is a way of basically taking wood that you don't want it to burn into a forest fire and emit all that CO2. You can put it in the ground and make for a healthier farm and forest land.
So are you saying that OPALCO and San Juan County are doing experiments with creating biochar?
Yes, we've gotten a grant from the U.S. Forest Service, and we're getting some matching grants from a few other organizations. The Washington Clean Energy Fund is an outstanding fund funded by the Department of Commerce, the Washington Department of Commerce. This program was set up by Inslee and his appointees, and we've won a number of Clean Energy Fund grants to fund things like battery storage and rapid ferry charging terminals, and also biomass generation. Biomass, I'm going to get in the weeds for a minute, but biomass is a controversial clean energy because, essentially you're taking wood and burning it to generate heat, to generate steam, to generate electricity. So the burning of that wood does emit CO2. But if you can burn it in some smart ways, and that's where some of these grants and visionary innovation comes in. If you can burn it in some smart ways such that you generate heat while creating biochar, you can absorb that CO2 or produce less of it. The other really important thing, we really actually are not that interested in producing biomass energy because of that negative aspect of emitting CO2. We only want to burn as much biomass as reduces our fire risk. So if we can keep the fuel out of the forest, the fuel that would burn the forest to the ground, if we can collect those, we can create jobs, and we can take that woody biomass, generate some energy in biochar, and improve the soil health, and get some energy out of it. But we don't want to do more. We don't want to deforest. We only want to reduce our fire risk. And that's one of the reasons our grant was awarded. Is when we do these grants, we try to find not just one benefit, but many. So for example, the very first Clean Energy Fund grant we got from Washington State was for storage. And if you've been hearing a lot about solar and batteries replacing natural gas peaker plants and that kind of thing, it's a very attractive combination to firm solar with storage. Storage goes away at night, or when a cloud, solar goes away at night, or when a cloud passes over, and that's called transient power, as opposed to hydro and coal power, which is what's called firm. It's sort of there 24/7. That's the same with wind. Wind during the cold snap on December 27th, wind in the region was almost non-existent. So it was not available to help us ride through, and natural gas plants had to be turned on and that sort of thing. So long story short, storage is typically used to firm things like solar and wind. But we figured out with our grant, we figured out 7 things you could do with it in addition to firming solar. And it's a little bit esoteric, but basically what we're generally trying to do, and what the Department of Energy, which has billions of dollars now in infrastructure grants to start chipping away at climate change and clean up the grid, what everybody's trying to do is find as many benefits to increase sort of the value proposition of transitioning to clean energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, first of all, does anybody want to talk some more about biochar and clearing forests and putting as much of that away as biochar in the ground? To me, that's real interesting. One of the things, the San Juan Islands only get 25 inches of rain a year. And so it can be damp, you can have drizzle, but there isn't really so much rain. And so in the summer, there's no rain at all, or almost none. And so there is a potential for fire, because there's an awful lot of wood on the San Juan Islands, and it is a worry. And so, Marty.
So we hear about controlled burns in order to prevent, potential wildfires. How does that link up with biochar?
Good question.
Yeah, so a controlled burn is emitting CO2.
Right.
But OPALCO, for example, just got a grant last year, and we employed a lot of young people in a conservation corps to collect woody biomass in the forest. We haven't got the power plant to do biomass generation yet. That's part of the grant that we'll be developing. But in the meantime, what you can do is collect that biomass in the forest. It's labor intensive, but you build these burn piles. And then and that's not a controlled burn. A controlled burn is kind of starting a fire and let it move in a careful, limited way. And sometimes it gets out of control.
Right.
This is very labor intensive. Young people making a good wage, pulling together woody biomass into these piles that look like haystacks. And then you light it on fire and let it burn for a little bit. And then you spray water on it and put it out. And that is biochar. So it's a more labor intensive way of reducing fuel in the forest and putting that carbon back into the soil. So you have this little carbon pile that's left there that then, rains over the year will sort of disperse it back into the soil.
So do you know, is California, the California Conservation Corps works a lot in the forests, I know. Are they doing this as well?
I'm sure they are, but keep in mind, it's a smart, labor-intensive way to do things. But sometimes, like you saw in New Mexico, a fire got out of control a few months ago. Sometimes you're trying to cover thousands and thousands of acres, and you just don't have the labor to do it. There's some other cool things California's doing. They have you read about the sheep grazing consultants that bring sheep into, or maybe it's goats.
Goats, yeah, goats.
I think it's goats.
They eat everything.
They eat everything. So, there's a lot of different innovations going on, and that's what we need. We need people to be thinking outside the box on this stuff. I get a lot of questions about electric vehicles and road tripping and things. How many, I'm just curious, do any of you have electric vehicles?
Just
No.
hybrid.
Good. That's great. Yeah, you may know that hybrids their battery component is getting bigger. So a lot of hybrids, especially some of the more recent ones, you can drive 40 or 50 miles on a battery without fueling. And since the average commute for a lot of people is under 50 miles, they can literally drive electric every day, except when they go on vacations and things like that. So it helps with range anxiety and yet still keeps your average daily commute very clean. I've been driving electric vehicles since 2013. And my first vehicle had a range of about 100 miles. My current one, I have two, my wife and I, and the new one has a range of 300 miles in the summer and about 240 miles in the winter. When it's colder, the batteries have a little less capacity. And anyway, the thing I like about electric is there's a lot less moving parts. There's no fossil fuel, there's no gas tank, there's no muffler, there's no carburetor and all that stuff that needs oil changes and maintenance. I literally have had no maintenance on either car since 2013, literally zero. So all of that hassle and cost is one of what's called the total cost of ownership is quite low. And then
like a great car for someone over 65.
well, I'm 68.
Okay, good. I'm 69, so 79. So anyway, and no cold in the winter. It's going to start in the winter. You don't have to worry about that. Antifreeze freezing, well, it's a great thing. Just the range, like you mentioned, is the thing that needs to be increased for me, because I would like to take it on a long trip, 300 miles or so. And
yeah, and that number 300 you hear that a lot. That's the one that surveys show that if you can get an affordable car over 300, that's a game changer. Frankly, though, I'll just tell you, it depends on your personal driving habits, but I just did a trip around the West with a 206. I did it in the winter, and I did it in really mountainous territory. And that, that was part of my trying to live the electric life, is find out worst case conditions, how does it go? And you have to be thoughtful about it. You can't just, go out in the morning and start driving. You have to kind of know where you're going to be charging that day, especially if you're driving around Colorado, where you're going to be going up some steep hills and using more energy, but then you're going to be going down the hill and regenerating. And it's amazing. In Colorado, I would come down a mountain and end up with pretty much the same range I had when I started, plus or minus. So it was quite something. But I don't want to oversell it. If you're doing long range driving, you need to be using apps like, the cars, first of all, are very good at telling you, how much range you have and showing you chargers that are in the vicinity. And frankly, most of the manufacturers are in relationships with charging networks. So with VW and Ford, for example, they're using Electrify America. Electrify America has thousands of chargers around, and we were there was only, I would say, every route we took, down to California, across and then back up, there were Electrify chargers typically every 50 miles or so, which is plenty. So typically we'll pass a few and then we'll pull over, and it takes about 38 minutes for me to charge our VW from 10% to 80%. And we would very rarely charge above 80%, only if we had some long distance thing. And we had a little cooler in the back, and we would just, we'd stop into, grocery store and get some chicken salads and hummus or whatever. And while we sit for our 38 minutes, we'll have a little lunch and do a little stretching and take a break. So, you drive for a few hours, take a break. Safe. It makes the trip go easier. It's okay. it's a different thing than we're used to, and just popping in a car and going as long as we want, and gas stations on every corner. But it's pretty cool being able to, you know, I'm looking out at my EV, it's plugged in right now. When I get home each day, just top it off in the evening, it's ready to go. It's fully charged in the morning. So it works out.
Another issue with electric vehicles would be for me living in a condo in Seattle. And so maybe it was Thursday or Friday last week, a group with the HOA entertained a contractor to come in and make a estimate for creating the infrastructure so we could have charging at each of our parking spaces in the basement of the building.
Fantastic.
And so we'll see that in a few weeks. But the concept is that the HOA itself would put in the infrastructure, which means running conduit around, making the place ready for actually installing places to plug in. But it would be up to each homeowner then to pay the additional amount to actually run the wires and get the plug put in. And the way in Seattle, I don't know if this is all places, and with this building, the wiring for the plugs for the charging places can be run right from each one of our electric meters. So that's the Seattle Light and what is it? Seattle Power and Light doesn't have to pay any attention to this at all. This all has to do with the inside of our building.
Yeah.
And we would automatically then each pay our amount for charging. And the electric meters are apparently smart enough that if you try to do too many things at once, it's sort of like a circuit box.
Mhm.
It'll slow down the use of power by the car charging, and wait to do it later in the evening when you're using less or whatever. So anyway, so that's what I was wondering about how we would do this.
Mhm.
And so we're going to get more information about it, but it is an issue about how you charge you have electric vehicle, how do you charge it if you live in an apartment building or you don't have your own garage or.
Right. Yeah, let me talk to that a little bit. The great point. I'm glad you brought it up. And yeah, it's ironic that urban driving, living in apartments and stuff, you don't actually have the convenience of maybe your own, putting a charger on your garden shed or whatever. That's what we did. Do you know Annie Cooklick?
No.
Okay, she used to live on the island, young woman that's now out in the world, a visionary innovator doing her thing, and she lives in Seattle like you. And she had the same problem. She has a Hyundai Kona EV, which has about a 250-mile range. And because of that, she doesn't need to charge every day. So what she does is she, first of all, advocates in the community for having chargers, and the state is trying to do that. Inslee is trying to do that, and it's happening all over the country, trying to get charger infrastructure more prolific or more common. But what Annie does is, when she goes to the grocery store, and this is very common, a lot of businesses will put up chargers to attract people to come and stay and shop while their vehicle charges. In the typical level 2 chargers, there's 3 levels of charging, level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is just plugging into a regular outlet. And for your average daily commute, it'll be charged in the morning. You don't even need a fancy charger. You can just plug it into a wall outlet. And I've done that for years here. Level 2 is much faster, about 6 times faster. And, it'll fully charge a car in a few hours. Level 3 is DC fast charging, which is used on road trips. You'll see them along transportation corridors where you can plug in and charge fully charge in a matter of a few tens of minutes. So I use those a lot when we're road tripping around the West. But Annie, she goes to a grocery store that has a level 2 charger, or has plenty of them. And that's where she goes in and shops for a half hour. And when she comes out, she's added half of the car's range during that time. And she knows, once you have a car, you kind of know the places. I went down to visit my niece in Seattle, and I discovered there's a great free charger in the Symphony Hall in the basement. And so that's 1 block from where she lived. I parked my car in Symphony Hall, paid $6 for the parking fee. And when I came back 6 hours later, the car was fully charged. So, these are the different habits. It's different, but it's not necessarily worse. It's kind of just a different approach.
One thought about range, which is that if you live someplace, you don't have to drive very far and you can charge it every once in a while. You could rent a car for long trips.
Mhm.
And so, and that could be something, a hybrid or something maybe.
Yep.
So that there are all kinds of ways to rearrange things, and that's what you're saying. You need to think about it a little bit differently. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have a car with a 350-mile range if you did that very infrequently, because you could always find some other way to do it, which,
Yes.
by renting a car or something. So anyway.
Yeah. I think that's coming. I'm sure you guys know the younger generations are very into ride sharing and not owning a vehicle, and then occasionally renting to meet their needs. So zip cars and things like that. And I'm really excited about that trend. We have a lot of low income, John, I know you know this, OPAL, the low income affordable housing. They do a great job, and they're putting EV chargers in their parking lots, and they're also trying to get some grants to have shared electric vehicles. So most of the time our cars sit unused, and if we can optimize the use, that's an act of efficiency. And so they'll have 1 or 2 EVs that serve a 15 house community.
Question for you: do the cars come with all 3 levels of charging, or only one, and then to get the highest charge, that's an extra thing you have to get, or how do you?
Yeah, great question. Pretty much every car these days, and the car I bought back in 2013, have all 3.
Okay, and you have the plugs for that. You switch plugs, or you use the same plug?
There's nowadays modern cars have settled on something called CCS, which is it's a plug. I have a t-shirt with a plug on it, but basically it's a little round plug with a little lower area, and that round part is level 1 and level 2. And then for the really fast DC fast charging, there's 2 other prongs in the plug. So the plug is kind of an oval shape, and the socket on the car can accommodate any of them. And typically when you buy an electric vehicle, they're going to give you a level 1 charger, which plugs into a regular outlet. And it just looks like an extension cord with a little oval charger. It's about this big, that's somewhere, on the cable. And you just plug it into your car in a regular outlet. And frankly, if you charge 50 miles a day, or if you drive 50 miles a day, that's all you need. A lot of people feel, oh, I want to have that level 2 charger. It's cool. I want to put it in my garage or whatever. But you know what? You don't have to rush to do that in most cases. You could start with what you get from the manufacturer and see if you really need it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
So my brother has a older Tesla and drove here from Indiana to California. And they were finding that charging took longer than it seemed than predicted
Hmm.
at many. And John seemed to think that it depended on what other cars were charging simultaneously.
That could be true. I've heard that, especially with Tesla, they have a very extensive network. They've done a great job of building out their network. And I have heard that, when we were on our road trip, we pulled into a discount shopping mall, which is where some of these chargers are. And oh my God, they had Teslas. I think they had 15 chargers there, Teslas, and every one of them was hooked up. And the Electrify America charger stations nearby, there was only 2 cars there, but they had, 8 chargers. So yeah, it's quite possible that that stand of Teslas that were all, sucking on the electrons, there might have been some moderation. I know that does happen sometimes. Also, if you've been driving really hard and fast, in our road trip, my wife and I coined a phrase, the rule of 60. We're in our 60s. We're going to drive 65 and we're going to keep the temperature at 65. And so, if you're going to drive 85 and you're going to, in the winter, let's say, and you're going to keep the heat on and all of that stuff to be comfortable and get to where you need to go fast, you're going to use more energy and you're going to heat the battery up. And so what happens when you pull into the charging station with a hot battery is it will temper how fast it charges that battery to not heat it. Heat is kind of above a certain level is not a good thing.
And now, so do Teslas have to go to Tesla charging stations, or can they go to any charging station?
Oh, great question. So you're going to get a kick out of this. Tesla has these adapters so they can plug into level 2 chargers around the country, because there's a lot of regular level non-Tesla proprietary chargers. But here's the other cool thing. I have something called a Tesla tap, which is the reverse. I have a regular CCS charging plug, and that's very common around the United States. And but occasionally you'll come up to what are called Tesla destination chargers, and there's a lot of hotels. So if you're road tripping, hotels will either have a regular level 2 charger, or they'll have a Tesla destination charger. And Tesla, quite often, I interviewed some of the hoteliers that are running those hotels along Route 66, and they all had Tesla destination chargers. And they said, oh yeah, Tesla came through and they said they'd put one in for free. So it's part of their strategy. And so I have a Tesla tap, and it's a little adapter, and it will plug into, it'll take the Tesla plug on the Tesla charger and convert it so it plugs into my CCS charger. And it was great. Tesla, so I was, able to charge pretty much at many more locations. So yeah, that's kind of the electric world. There's a standard for gasoline nozzles. You kind of know that nozzle is going to fit in any car, and there's still a kind of emerging shootout on which plug is going to be the plug. But it's the early days, and early adopters and stuff are working it out. Not that you need a Tesla tap. If you had just a regular one, there's plenty of chargers. If you look at PlugShare, which is an app that shows you pretty much every electric vehicle charger in the world, and you're wondering, oh, are there any in my neighborhood? You'll see in PlugShare where they're at, and they'll tell you, is it Tesla? Is it CCS? How powerful is it? It has little reports from users on, oh, I just charged there 15 minutes ago and it was awesome, or it was broken, or whatever. So it's crowdsourced.
So is there a converter for Tesla to go to
Yes.
the other
Yeah.
direction, whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my brother, he has 2 Teslas, and when they travel, they bring the converter. I bring the Tesla converter. He brings the CCS converter.
Yeah, we saw the picture of the small electric plane. I'm just wondering, is there a future for the the big boys, the large commercial airlines with their thousands of flights a day and all that. Is there electricity in their future?
Yes, but let me just say, you want to Google on Miles O'Brien PBS electric plane, and you will see, I think it's a Nova episode on the electrification of air transportation. And Miles, I just have the greatest regard for Miles. He's a great science reporter, and he goes where most reporters are just, they don't have the intellect to, kind of extract the deep insight that he does. And he talks with, he takes a look at Silicon Valley startups, NASA, everybody who's out there doing anything with electric air transportation, particularly small air taxis and that sort of thing. We're expecting in the next 10 years, the reason OPALCO is putting fast chargers at airports, we're expecting electric air taxis to be coming to the islands from Seattle, Vancouver, and Victoria in the next 10 years. And it's entirely reasonable to expect that based on the innovations that are happening now. So check that episode out. I'm quite sure it's Nova. I might just do a little Googling here and see if I can find it, but it's a fantastic hour. I really encourage you to check it out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
What
and
about-
the answer is there will be electric planes. That plane I showed you in that picture, that was an electric float plane, and it's in its air trials. And I'm sure when you're creating new airplanes, the FAA has all kinds of, or the government has all kinds of things that you have to prove it out, but it's coming. But the bigger ones, like passenger jets, I think the answer is it's probably going to be some sort of hybrid fuel, perhaps syn fuels or biofuels might be the early ones.
What about hydrogen, liquid hydrogen for planes or anything?
Yeah, I'm seeing some action there. I don't have a lot of knowledge about that. I can tell you that hydrogen is very exciting for long haul trucking. The facilities to support green hydrogen, and does everybody understand there's dirty hydrogen and there's good hydrogen, and good green hydrogen made typically from solar power, turning water into hydrogen and oxygen. That's the kind of hydrogen that you want, not blue hydrogen or whatever. So to power a vehicle with hydrogen takes facilities that have, liquid hydrogen and can pump it in. And if you Google on, hydrogen trucking, you'll probably see some videos. I think Miles did a pretty good one about Germany. Germany is, I think, advancing this, as is Japan. And basically you pull into like a gas station, but you pump hydrogen into, a pressure tank, and then you can be on the road. And the nice thing is it weighs a lot less than a battery to go an equivalent distance. And if you do long haul trucking, you don't need hundreds of thousands of charging stations around the country. You need, let's say 1,000 on major truck corridors. And so I think that's where you'll see hydrogen electric transportation first. And by the way, that's still an electric vehicle. You're taking that hydrogen and pumping it through a fuel cell to generate electricity. So that's why I think you're going to see the biggest action soon.
How about lighter than air aircraft? There are people now excited about blimps.
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't know much about it, but it makes sense. Anything that you can do to reduce the amount of energy it takes to go up and down or keep it up, that's pretty cool. And
I think Spain has an arrangement with some folks. I don't know if they're in Britain to create 20 of these things. And they use very little power, of course.
Yeah.
But they don't carry all that many people, and they only go about 80 miles an hour, I think. What else? What else? Glenna,
Um,
can't hear you. You're muted. Glenna has a question. We'll get it. No, can't hear you. You're still muted.
Yeah.
Now can you hear me?
There, yes.
Okay. Okay. My electric vehicle is my little golf cart. We live in one of these communities with everybody driving around in golf carts. And I spend a lot of time worrying about running out of juice, you know, and for people that can't or haven't planned well, to get to a charging station, what do you do when you run out of electricity in your electric vehicle?
Oh, I have a great story to tell you.
Okay.
Well, electric golf carts are powered typically by old-fashioned lead acid batteries, very similar to the ones that are in a conventional fossil fueled car. So they're smaller, they don't have a lot of energy density compared to lithium batteries and that sort of thing. So yeah, they don't hold much charge. So our very first day of doing the EV road trip around the West, we had dinner, we left here, we drove down, had dinner with friends in Portland, and we had enough range, we felt, to get to our hotel, which was an hour south of Portland. If we stopped at a discount mall a little bit before and just threw in a couple minutes of electricity, and then we get to our hotel, which we knew had a Tesla charger, Tesla destination charger. And so, you know, we're driving along, and it's at night. It's, you know, we had a nice dinner, and we dallied, and it's after 10. And what we didn't appreciate was that this discount mall closes up, and they have gates. So you can't get into the charger. And we had 17 miles of range left. And it was 18 miles to the hotel. And you know what? We probably would have made it, because they have sort of a, you know, built-in cushion. But we didn't want to chance it. It was late at night, and we didn't want to have to deal with that. It was kind of an amateur move on my part. I've been driving EVs forever. But I'm an engineer, and I also like to push limits and sort of find out what you can and can't do. So anyway, we just sort of looked at each other, and we drove around looking for a security car to see if there's somebody that'd be kind enough to open the gate. And then I started looking at, there's the Electrify America charger with the bright green lights, and we're looking at it. It's so close. And I'm realizing, oh, it's just on the other side of some bushes, and there's a sidewalk. If I drive up on that sidewalk and put my butt of the car kind of into the bushes a little bit where the charge port is, and sure enough, I was able to do it. It's a crossover utility vehicle, so I was able to go up on the curb without any issue, and got my the car very close to the charger. I went down to the charger, and you know, got it going with my cell phone, and the cable literally just reached the car. It was kind of arcing up from the charger up the hill to the bushes, and I charged the car to, you know, I think I added 20 miles, and off we went, and everything was fine. But let's just say that I ran out. What do you do? And the answer is, and it's good to know ahead of time when you're doing these things. Well, with VW and with other other manufacturers, they have, to deal with range anxiety, they have a free service. You call a toll-free number, and there's somebody that will come and take you to a charger. So that's one way. There's tow trucks that have charging capabilities increasingly. USAA, you know, a lot of the sort of automobile service things are understanding this is a huge transition that's happening, and you know, so there's different kinds of problems. But in the 13 years of driving, I've never actually run out.
So AAA has a charging thing that you can call them up and they can come and charge you?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You would think that roadside assistance, which can bring gasoline, should also be able to bring some minimum charge to you.
Yeah, there's, and you know, it's early days. There's a lot of innovation going on. It's emerging technology. And at the very least, they can do the old-fashioned thing that AAA does, which is tow you to a charging station.
Hey,
Yeah, great question. What else? This is fun.
so picturing a person walking with a gas can to the charging station and doesn't quite work. No.
No. Yeah,
Gasoline is very dense with energy compared to batteries, right?
that's right.
So.
Yeah, that's why
So-
airplanes can fly.
Yeah, so here's the question, and I think, you know, everybody thinks about it a little bit. Does it make sense to buy an EV now or wait for batteries with a higher range? Or does it make sense to buy a used EV, maybe at a lower cost, if you're just driving, you know, fairly short distances? I mean, so it would seem to me that there are alternatives to just thinking, gosh, I need to wait for the best battery.
Great. So when we bought our first EV, 100-mile range, we had two cars. The other was a Honda CR-V. So we used our EV every chance we got. Whoever's going out, they take the EV. And if somebody needed to, you know, if Sue went out and I needed to go out too, then I'd get stuck with the CR-V. So we in general were very quickly converting over to mostly electric driving, but we had the CR-V for vacations and stuff like that. So that was our calculus, but we wanted to start getting into it and living that electric life, reducing our carbon emissions, and frankly, you know, reducing our energy bills. I replaced a Toyota pickup with the Nissan Leaf, and my gasoline bill went from about $1,600 a year for the truck to $200 a year for electricity for the Leaf. So we're saving money, we reduced emissions, and we had a car that was, well, you know, the phrase we used a lot was the perfect island car, because in the islands, typically, you know, you might drive 20 miles to 40 miles a day, piece of cake for the 2013 Nissan Leaf 100-mile range. So I think it really comes down to, do you want to stop emitting fossil fuels? Remember, it stays in the air for 175 plus years. Can you afford them? Right now, it's hard to get them. They're in such demand. But there are, you know, new ones that are smaller. The Nissan Leaf is still made, and the Hyundai Kona and others, the Kia Niro, that are more affordable and less fancy, that have 250-mile range. The Chevy Bolt, which has been sort of rebooted. They had some battery problems. The batteries were burning up. I think that's the newer version of the Bolt is very good and affordable on the new side. And on the used side, there's just a ton of electric vehicles out there that are used and still have good range. But I think it really comes down to your lifestyle. If you have two cars, to me, it's a no-brainer. One of them should be some kind of electric vehicle that matches your lifestyle. Maybe not both, but at least get one and use the heck out of it whenever you can. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there might, I would have some questions about OPALCO and what OPALCO is trying to do. You mentioned some of those things a little earlier.
Yeah.
So, and I had talked right at the beginning about who OPALCO is. And OPALCO is an unusual electric utility, I think, in part because it's owned by its customers. and is not for profit. So one of the things that I think has been talked about a little bit in the San Juan Islands is finding alternative non-carbon sources of energy, maybe from tidal, tide movement, or even a small nuclear reactor, because I guess the federal government has finally approved plans for these small reactors, at least one set of them. What is OPALCO thinking about relative to sources of energy? It's a distributor, it's not a creator. So what is OPALCO and thinking about, and are those ideas translatable to other electrical providers?
So let's start with what we're thinking. We in the Northwest, we have 2 submarine cables that connect us with the mainland, and our winter peak load is around 80 megawatts. So that's a lot. If you wanted to replace that with solar, let's say, it would take 1,200 acres of solar and a lot of battery storage, because the winter is very low sun. The output from solar arrays here is 1/10 of what it would be in summer. So you would need $10 billion worth of battery to store up the sun you generated in the summer and move it to the winter. Not practical. So the energy of choice in our area, and a lot of times solutions are all about location, location, location. The Southwest is a great place to have solar and a smaller battery, because the sun's pretty good year round. But here, our equivalent is tidal energy. And in the islands, we have great tidal flow. And because it's predictable, it goes up and, it produces and then slack tide, and then produces and slack tide, but it's every few hours. So what that means is you need a much smaller battery to bridge the gap before the next tidal flow. And it's year round. And so you can predict when the energy will be generated. It doesn't have anything to do with, the sun shining or the wind not blowing. And so we're very excited about that. And we have a grant in the works for that. But anytime you put anything in the sea, you have tremendous permitting complexity. Frankly, putting anything anywhere, putting solar, the millions of acres of solar will be needed in the Northwest to replace coal power. That's going to take land. So land that has to be permitted, and you've probably heard of not in my backyard, NIMBYism. And if you take a look at the Sierra Club, they have hundreds of lawsuits trying to slow wind or prevent wind in certain areas. And I get it. A lot of people don't want to see wind or don't want to have it in natural areas. And the Northwest is nothing if not natural. All the forest and farmland here. So people are having to rethink what they're willing to do for energy. And for us, tidal is a good option, but it is very expensive. It's an emerging technology. It's where solar and wind were 20 years ago. And we're not expecting the tidal energy to be cost effective until later in the next decade at least. So, but because it takes so long to get these things permitted and going, we're starting the thinking now. And that's the nature of utilities. We don't think in terms of months, we think in terms of decades. Our long range plans, which we update every few years, look out 20 years. And we just did our latest long range plan last year, and tidal's in the picture. So that's one of the things we're looking at. We are trying to have as much solar as possible. And the nice thing about solar is we got plenty of it in the summertime. So, we expect in roughly 10 years that the power that comes through our cables from the mainland, from Bonneville Power Administration, from the hydro system, will go to zero during the noonish time frame each sunny day between May and September. But then at night, boom, it'll rocket up. We don't think the county and the members here are probably too interested or supportive of having small modular reactors, SMRs, in the county. But we do think that SMRs will proliferate around the world. And I think it'll be a next generation of clean, fairly clean, low carbon electricity. France, as you all may know, has, I think, 75 to 80% of their electricity comes from nuclear, and they're feeling less vulnerable to the natural gas situation that, that the Ukraine war is causing with Russia. So I think we're seeing a lot of SMR or small modular reactor activity around the world ramping up. It is an emerging technology. Anyway, I think in our area, though, it's basically in the Northwest, it's going to be wind, solar, and hydro and tidal in our specific neighborhood. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, what's the chance that Bonneville will decide to sell their power to California?
Well, they're already doing it. And by the way, California sells their power to us. Bonneville Power Administration is a balancing authority. And so they can take energy that is generated by a variety of sources and route it through a fairly sophisticated transmission grid. And some of it goes to the Southwest, especially. You may know that if you Google on the duck curve is when, in California, lots of solar generation during the day. And then as the sun sets, load is increasing because people are getting home, they're plugging in their EVs, they're turning on their TVs and cooking and so forth. And so the load is rising as the generation is falling. And so that's when, quite often, when California will go out to the larger grid, the Western grid, and say, hey, I have some contracts with you all. I want some of that kWh to ride through this. It looks like a duck, basically, what used to be and what is in terms of load and generation. And there's times like December 27th, when the Northwest had this cold snap and there was no wind power. We were able to bring electricity in from south to help us ride through that. And we hope that there will be more and more collaboration like that, because we are all in it together and we all are developing resources as fast as we can. And California doesn't have cold snaps the way we do. And we don't generally have heat snaps the way, California does. And so if we can keep the neighborhoods and the cities and the states gridded together, we can avoid some of the problems that you're seeing, for example, in Texas, where ERCOT, ERCOT, they're kind of their own entity and they're not as plugged in as they would like. And if we can do that, we can, I think, avoid increasing outages that we're expecting. We're expecting more regional outages and rolling blackouts, simply because there's especially here in Washington State, the state is trying to decommission coal plants as fast as they possibly can.
Where do you see willingness to think about the small nuclear?
Where do I see it?
Yeah.
I think there's Microsoft, check it out, Google around on it, but I think there's an SMR project in Idaho or Wyoming.
Wyoming with TerraPower, I think.
There you go. I know the UK has a project going. Yeah, I'm not up to speed on the state of the art on that, but I know they're happening in the United States and around the world.
The one advantage of the SMRs is they can be fabricated in a factory and then taken to a site and installed. So they're not nearly as expensive. They also don't have as much power, but they're not nearly as expensive as building everything on site. So that's supposed to be a good thing.
I think
Big,
there's a joke we have. If there was ever a power outage, one of the things that people worry about is a tsunami, a Cascadia fault event that causes a huge tidal wave that really wrecks the region for a number of months, where power might be out for a number of months. one of the sort of tongue-in-cheek plan Bs is, get a Russian nuclear sub. If you know anything about these nuclear subs, they basically could power a city. The average power that we use in the county, one submarine could power the whole county. So, back one up into one of the harbors and plug in. But that's really, I tell you that anecdotally to just say that, John, you mentioned the energy density of gasoline. Well, the energy density of an SMR is huge. You can really deliver a lot of power from a small space, as opposed to land intensive things like solar and wind power.
Well, my husband was a nuclear engineer for a long time, and also worked on batteries, lithium batteries back at Argonne. And he has said often that, we're really going to have to get serious about re-energizing the nuclear industry in order to deal with climate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's no easy choices here, right? The carbon emissions are a juggernaut. Things have to be done, and they have to be done soon. So there's no easy solutions. There's no magic wand to wave. I don't think there's any single source of generation that is going to help us here. The good news is, if you're in a community where SMRs are not palatable, some other community nearby might do it, and at least in their doing it, they're freeing up energy that your community can use. So, I think all of these things, solar, wind, hydro, small modular reactors, tidal, they're all incrementally the solution. And each community will sort of figure out which ones will work in their area and are palatable. I'm sure you saw the Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket battles over wind turbines out at sea that went on for years. No easy solutions. And if we're going to keep doing that, it's just going to take a long time to do what must be done.
So
I'd just like to add one other thing. You mentioned your husband worked at Argonne. Thank you. Argonne, the national laboratories are a jewel in the crown, and we get grants from Pacific Northwest National Labs, and we can't say enough about their visionary innovation and the wisdom, the patents they generate. They're just doing so much great work in thinking how to advance clean energy storage. One of the best storage solutions we got a grant for was the technology was developed at Pacific Northwest National Labs. And, they license that technology, my understanding is, for free if you agree to manufacture it in the US. So it's good for jobs, it's good for innovation, it's good for clean energy. And I just can't say enough about, that's an example of government working in my book.
what about the need for a smart grid? Are we underserved by our grid today, and does that need to get fixed somehow? I'm not sure.
Yes. Yeah, smart grid, great question, John. Smart grid is a loaded term. I went and gave a talk a few years ago in one town where everybody was up in arms about, smart stuff spying on you. And, all I can say is, if you have a Nest thermostat, you're probably saving energy, and it is internet connected. And that's the whole idea. I can, set my thermostat back intelligently and control it when I'm away. When I'm away, I have, I live the electric life. I have an app that shows me what's on in my house, and I love it. It helps me save energy. So like anything, you can find stuff to not like about it, to be worried about. But smart grid is one of those terms that means many things. So sometimes it means smart homes, that use energy efficiently and smartly. But in utilities, smart grid also means, can we control it? Let's see, I'm just thinking, I'd like to show you a picture. I'm going to escape out of this. Bear with me just a moment. The utility, might have a picture here of it. Let's see, while I'm looking, I'll just show you, here's a picture of a tidal map, tidal energy. The red shows very strong energy in the county, and there's an orbital marine tidal generator, 2 megawatt generator that we're contemplating putting here. Here's the solar problem. The summer solar generation in yellow is very strong, but you can see it's a fraction in the winter, but our load doubles in the winter, and we call that the winter problem. So that's one of the reasons that's a problem. And I mentioned location. So here's a map of the United States, and you can see in the Southwest, very intense solar insolation. That's what
So,
the
so
means.
we're not, you're not on a share screen?
Oh, I am sorry. Let's get that up. Are you seeing that now?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, first, sorry, here's the title. So you can see the red here is tidal energy, very strong. This is a orbital marine 2 megawatt tidal generator. And we're looking at doing a trial right here in this area where you see that intense red. I mentioned solar, the winter problem. The yellow here is solar production. This is January to December. So you can see in the summertime, lots of solar. In the winter, not so much, but load doubles in the winter. And so, that's a problem. And the Northwest is not the Southwest. Southwest, this is a map showing the solar intensity. And the dark red is the most intense solar insolation. So solar in these areas is awesome. Here, it's light yellow. And here's the scale over here, and light yellow is kind of at the bottom. And this is annual solar irradiance. But what that means is you can take the same panel. So this is an analysis looking at a house that uses about 12,000 kWh per year. And this is the Southwest and the Northwest. And long story short, in the Southwest, the radiance is double, so more sun. The installation size required is almost half as big to generate 12,000 kWh. The cost is a little bit less in the Southwest. So your cost is, in the Southwest to have an array to generate 12,000 kWh is half the cost in the Northwest, because you need more panels to generate the same amount of generation. The electric rates in the Southwest are higher. They're more than twice in the Northwest. And so your payback period is, $3,000 per year versus 1,200. So it pays back in 5.37 years in the Southwest, whereas it takes 25 years in the Northwest. And this is unsubsidized. So tax credits and stuff can reduce that. But long story short, just like with EVs, depends on where you're at and what you want to do with it. And in the Northwest, solar is good, and it's something you can, generate in the summertime for those that can afford it. But let's not fool ourselves. It's not like as affordable as living in the Southwest with it. So I'm going to bring up a chart to answer your question, John, about the smart grid. Bear with me just a minute here. Yeah, right here. So we've been talking with the Department of Energy about their excellent grant programs that are emerging, and they're interested in our tidal projects and other things. But one of the things that we mentioned to them is our smart grid. And so what we mean by a smart grid is, here's OPALCO, below the green line here is OPALCO and its energy services. And we also have a division called Rock Island. We provide broadband services. So that's the area up here. And so OPALCO, has all kinds of things for managing the grid. And we symbolize this with a tree. The grid is kind of the roots of the tree, and the branches, as we expand broadband out into our community. We used to be really lousy broadband until OPALCO opened up its fiber grid to the community. And we view it as branches and twigs of the tree. So pretty much everybody in the county now has very good either fiber or wireless LTE broadband. And that allows us to do some really cool things. So yes, it allows you to do your internet things, schools, libraries, government, and so forth, internet service providers. OPALCO provides broadband to all of those. But this green area over here is where the smart action is. And so once you're connected to the grid, you may notice, and frankly, a lot of laws are requiring that new appliances be internet connected so that they can, during peak demand periods, you can reduce the load by telling things like your water heater and your air conditioning and your heater to take a break for 15 minutes. And so those signals are all sent out over the smart grid. In electric vehicles, you can say, hey, stop charging for 15 minutes. But even more than that, you can say to the electric vehicle, I will pay you a really good rate if you give me 15 minutes worth of your battery. And that's how in the future, we will sort of levelize the load. During peak demand times, we will go out to the grid and say, take a break or give me some juice. And solar, of course, does that during the day, and wind, during the windy periods. But all of that is what's called dispatchable load and dispatchable generation. So that's what we think of as the really smart grid. And, we're very excited about that. I think I have one other thing I'd like to show you about the smart grid. So in our neck of the woods, here's the map of our islands. And you can see this red line right here is the cable to the mainland. And we got a grant to put a solar array and a battery storage here on Decatur Island. But you can see these red lines that feed all the islands. A lot of those are submarine cables. And they're what's called generally a radial fashion. So if this cable goes out right here, or this line goes out right here, San Juan Island is down. And so the smart grid is really not just about generation. This is where we're going. And you'll notice the green lines here. So what we're trying to do is create a smart grid that is self-healing architecture. Instead of radial, we're trying to interconnect and create as many loops as possible. And with these multipath connectors, and with the grid control, all these little gears, we can say to switches throughout, hey, okay, power's out over here. We want you to, we want the grid to send power from another alternate route, if you will. And that's that self-healing architecture. And the smart part of it especially is that stuff can happen automated. And so when a failure is detected, literally within seconds, if not fractions of a second, power can be rerouted and reallocated accordingly. And, let's say there's a mainland outage and we're now on local batteries and solar, we can send a signal out to the hundreds or thousands of EVs in the county and say, stop charging. And stop heating for the next half hour. And you won't even notice it yourself, but it will reduce major amounts of load in the county. So that's really what smart grid is about. Kind of a long answer, John, but I hope that's helpful.
That's great. It reminds me of the internet a little bit.
Exactly. It is the internet.
I think we should wrap up and, but maybe there are a few more questions.
I need to say
This is
goodbye,
your
but
chance.
thank you. This has
Yes.
been fascinating.
It's
Oh,
just great.
Appreciate it. I'm sorry I was late.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And by the way, just before you leave, I just put in the comment, the Miles O'Brien piece on electric air transportation. So that's at pbs.org. It's a Nova episode. I encourage you to check it out. And anything Miles does, man, check it out. He's so smart.
It's really fun to talk with somebody that knows what they're talking about,
Yes.
compared
Thanks.
to talking to each other. So it's just great. Yeah, so this is whatever. Anybody else has any questions?
John, if I could just say thank you. I'm trying to give a perspective from my own personal life and how, I'm trying to live the electric life, and I'm down in the trenches working with the utilities to get, some good stuff done. So I'm trying to give that perspective. It's all very complicated. There's a lot to it. This is one perspective, and, I try to speak from my own personal experience. Couldn't answer all your questions, but there's a lot of good information out there, and PBS, I think, does a great job of helping demystify and sort of open things up for the average person. I encourage you to check out some of that stuff, and yeah. Keep doing what you're doing.
Really fun. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
much enjoyed it.
Appreciate the
All right.
interest.
Wish you the best.
Thank you.
All
Take
right.
care.
Okay.
Okay, I guess, so we'll ramp it up, you guys, and we'll get together next week. Talk about
Okay.
something.
Okay, John.
Thanks,
good.
Jay. I'll be in touch with you.
Awesome. Great seeing you guys. Have a great
All
day.
right.
Great, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.